right, hello everyone. Welcome to session 7, Consciousness, Construction, and Communication. I'm Michelle Szydlowski, a PhD candidate with the University of Exeter and an instructor at Beacon College in Florida. This session features a truly international group of speakers, including Eva Spiegelhofer of the University of Vienna in Austria, Erin Jones from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and Yoonjung Kim of Seoul National University in South Korea. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started with Eva. I will let her go ahead and share her screen. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. And at the end of all three presentations, we'll have some questions and answers. It sounds like these particular programs might be right at 20 minutes, so we'll probably save our questions till the end. Again, anything in the chat box, keep your microphones muted. And if you don't mind, if you turn your camera off, if you're not speaking, it tends to help with the bandwidth. I will turn it over to Eva.
All right, and I will just start to share my screen and hope that you can all see that.
Yep, looks great.
Yeah, it won't let me start the presentation there though. Let's go. Okay, does it work for everyone? Cool. Okay, so my talk will mostly be about animal languages and communication. And we already heard a little bit about that during the conference so far. I would say that's also due because anthropology is about bringing in other animals and making their heard one way or the other. For me, I have a cultural studies background, so I approached this from an intercultural communication perspective, and that was basically the theoretical side of my thesis, bringing together interspecies communication and intercultural communication. And then the project also had a practical part where I conducted interviews, like I did some field work on farmed animals. And therefore, as you can see, some of my slides will feature photos of the very cows, pigs, and also chickens whom I visited. I will touch upon this practical dimension of my research in the second half of the presentation, but first, I will start with a brief definition of what interspecies communication is, and then I will say a few words about animal language and why it matters in relation to interspecies communication. Then I will talk about the parallels that can be drawn between interspecies and intercultural communication. And finally, how I found these parallels reflected in the case studies for my project. To conclude, I will then suggest what lessons we could take away from intercultural communication about interacting with other animals. So, to give you an idea from the start how I understand and use the term interspecies communication, let me begin with a definition taken from zoo semiotics. There, interspecies communication is defined as sign action or interaction occurring between different species, that is, between groups that do not share a similar perception and codification of the world. So basically, we could label any kind of semiotic meaning exchange across species boundaries as interspecies communication. This process does not have to involve humans at all, and it could occur between any living organisms. Nevertheless, in my talk, I use the term interspecies communication to refer to communicative exchanges between humans and other animals specifically. Now, another term for this would be human-animal communication, but I guess you can all see why I avoid this term, and especially the problematic human-animal dualism it implies. Now, this dualistic distinction between humans and other animals already brings us to the unavoidable question of language when talking about interspecies communication. This is because language has served as a boundary marker between humans and other animals for a long time, and it's still commonly defined as human language. that abstract, symbolic, communicative systems that only humans use successfully. I will not lay out the entire debate about the so-called linguistic human-animal divide here. Instead, I included a quote on this slide that, in my view, sums the whole thing up quite nicely. The quote is taken from Barbara Noska's brilliant book, Beyond Boundaries. She writes, "The basic question should not be whether animals have or have not human-like language. In having to pass our tests, as measured by our yardsticks, they will always come out second best, namely as reduced humans. The real question to be posed is how the animals themselves experience the world and how they organize this experience and communicate about it." So Noske argues that we should not and cannot assess animal communication or animal forms of language on the base of human standards. What she also exposes here is a problematic, quote, circularity of argument, unquote, when it comes to the question whether animals have language or not. Because if we define language as that what humans do from the start, then it necessarily excludes other animal forms of communication. I bring this problem up here mainly because I found that preconceptions about other animals and language are main obstacles when engaging with interspecies communication as something to be taken seriously. As actual attentive communication that is about understanding animals as animals, not as if they were just feathery or scaly or furry humans. But to put it differently, interspecies communication is about understanding animals as others. And this already brings me to the heart of the matter, namely that both intercultural and interspecies communication assume that there is another, someone from another culture or another species, who is different from us, but someone we nevertheless want to understand. Thus, I got the idea that intercultural and interspecies communication might share some essential parallels, and that therefore we can probably learn from intercultural communication about how to approach other animals. On this slide, I visualize this idea in a very simplified manner, and it looks so simplistic because I just want to ask rather bluntly, why should one of these border crossings across cultural boundaries be possible while the other, crossing species boundaries, is still widely deemed impossible? A keyword for this might be otherness. The sense that other animals are just too different from us to understand them. To illustrate that otherness also plays a central role in intercultural communication, here a definition of othering by Adrian Holiday, taken from his book Intercultural Communication and Ideology. Holiday defines othering as constructing or imagining a demonized image of them or the other, which supports an idealized image of us or the self. Now, this basically is normal group behavior that fosters group identity. It happens all the time that there is an in-group which defines itself against out-groups. But this gets problematic when the dominant in-group begins to oppress out-groups, marginalizing them as the other, and eventually turning these marginalized others into a, quote from Holiday again, definable commodity, unquote. I think at this point we can all see why this applies not only to human groups, but to other animal species as well. Maybe most of all to farmed animals, who are routinely commodified. And this commodification is justified through othering. The claim that non-human animals have no language and cannot speak is just one of many which emphasizes this otherness of other animals and sustains human exceptionalism, which is then used to justify the exploitation of other animals. Now, intercultural communication theory teaches us that othering is bad practice when it comes to cultural others. And I would argue that we can say the same about interspecies communication. othering animals in the sense of perceiving them as less than human gets in the way of understanding. And then there's another key parallel between intercultural and interspecies communication, and that is nonverbal communication. Obviously, we have to do with nonverbal communication when we interact with another animal, because we soon reach the limits of verbal communication. But the same can also happen in intercultural context, because we might encounter someone whose language we cannot speak at all, and the other way around. So if we assume that the language barrier between us is absolute, then this situation could be likened to moments when we try to understand a member of another animal species whom we also cannot talk to directly. This is because in both cases, verbal language simply fails us. And because of these limitations of verbal language, intercultural communication theorists do acknowledge the significance of the non-verbal code. James Noiley, for instance, whom I quoted on this slide, explains that nonverbal cues carry meaning in relation and in addition to what is expressed verbally in a conversation. So even if we insist that other animals have no verbal language and can only communicate with humans non-verbally, there is still a lot of meaning which can be conveyed using gestures, eye contact, movement, scent, and so on. And as you can see on the slide, there are a couple of channels of non-verbal communication, like paralanguage, haptics, olfactics, and these might apply even more to other than human animals, because they are much more perceptible to touch or smell, for example. So who's to say then that these non-verbal cues only carry meaning in human communication? Based on these two fundamental similarities between intercultural and interspecies communication, I wanted to know how a theory of interspecies communication would look like if we modeled it after the theory that already exists for intercultural communication. So first, here are some problems and challenges involved in intercultural communication. And on the right-hand side, you find similar challenges that I identified for interspecies communication. I highlighted the same words on both sides to show that these similarities are actually striking. For example, there might be no shared language in the case of intercultural communication, and obviously between humans and other animals. So we will have to make use of nonverbal modes of communication. And there's othering, which, as we have seen, in both cases involves hierarchical power structures, discrimination, exploitation, and commodification. And since the problems we might encounter in interspecies and intercultural communication are similar, the strategies are too. They involve the need for learning and experience, and for becoming more aware that despite the differences that might be there between us, there might also be common ground. Now, this might all look quite good on paper or on the screen in theory, but I wondered how it would look like on the pasture, in the field, in practice, in actual human other animal encounters. Unfortunately, time's short today, so I cannot give you a lot of details about my fieldwork. Instead, I summed up my key findings from the interviews I conducted on the following slide. So here we go. I had 3 interviews, so it was qualitative research on a small scale, and all of them agreed that the cows, pigs, and chickens have their own kind of language. The interviewers were also conscious, however, that as humans, they only have a limited understanding of these languages, which the animals use mostly to communicate among themselves. But all 3 interviewers also described situations when the animals used either these or other communicative forms to interact with them. These other forms might be some that they only use with humans. And in the case of pigs, for example, an interviewer described a particular high-pitched type of grunting that she only heard the pigs use with humans and not among each other. Sorry. Equally, all three interviews agreed that time, attentiveness, and respect are key to understanding other animals better. And this, I would argue, seems very similar to what effective intercultural communication requires, because learning another language takes time, and learning to understand animal language also takes time. Also, to understand someone from another culture takes even more than time. It takes curiosity, and to quote the German linguist Lothar Bredella, it takes the flexibility of mind, which allows us to cross borders and accept differences, unquote. So I would urge us to do the same in interspecies contexts, given that there is empirical evidence that communication between humans and other animals is already happening. All right, let me sum up this talk in one central takeaway message, here posed as a question. If we took a fraction of the open-mindedness and attentiveness that we aim to cultivate in our intercultural relations and applied it to our interactions with other animals, this could only improve how we treat them and interact with them. In this sense, I propose that we can make use of the parallels between intercultural and interspecies communication to raise people's awareness and to educate them about how we can relate to our animal others in more respectful ways. Now, I'm aware that in my talk, I only scratched the surface of the multi-layered issue of listening to and responding to other animals. And I'm also aware that I put forward a rather abstract theory of interspecies communication that does not apply to all animal species in the same way. Like if we think of animals who are just more, like way more different from humans than some mammal species and some bird species. In fact, I would argue that this theory could not even be equally applied to all individuals of one species, because we all, humans and other animals, are individuals. And so our approaches to interspecies communication need to factor in these individual as well as species differences, ultimately with the purpose of improving our relationships with other animals and as a way towards appreciating them as the sentient and articulate subjects that they are. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful job. Thank you so much, Eva. We are going to switch gears and go right into Erin's presentation. So Erin, if you want to share your screen, you participants can go ahead and type any questions for Eva in the chat box. And at the end of the three presentations, I'll go ahead and read some of those out for all of our presenters so that we can get some answers. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I keep having there we go. Okay. It's very early here for me, so I'm going to do my best. Drinking lots of coffee to stay on top of things. So welcome. Thanks for being here. My name is Erin Jones, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and part of the New Zealand Centre for Human Animal Studies. I'm also a certified professional dog trainer and certified dog behavior consultant, and I was really interested in combining my professional life or my professional interests with my academic interests. And so I came up with this idea of what I wanted to do for my research. I wanted it to be multidisciplinary, and I wanted to look at how we construct dogs and how that shapes their social and companionship roles. I was also really interested in how our own behavior affects our dog's behavior, because I think that's sort of lacking a little bit in the research that's existing out there. And I was also interested in how we might be able to construct a dog-specific model of consent rather than just applying this human constructed idea of what consent is. And I was also interested in the implications that choice and consent and autonomy has for our companion dogs on their well-being. So like I said, I used a mixed methods approach because I was feeling like a lot of the behavior studies out there were providing great information, but they weren't really accounting for this sort of natural ecological niche that our companion dogs are living in, which is our homes, and not necessarily accounting for human behavior. And on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the sociological studies really focus on the human benefit to that relationship, which again is great. Talks about things like how dogs can be social lubricant for us, talks about the health benefits of pet ownership, but not really accounting for the dog as much in that regard. And I'm really interested in the effects of this relationship on our dogs. So I really wanted to be able to center our dogs in a way. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what autonomy and choice and consent is in the dog world. So autonomy, the definition of it is the capacity to make an informed, uncoerced decision. And the idea of choice goes sort of hand in hand with consent and autonomy because it's something that's inherently rewarding to all of us. It's empowering. It's something that we need in order to feel safe and secure and in control of ourselves. And that's inherently rewarding and important for our well-being. And consent is voluntarily agreeing to the proposal of someone else, void of any coercion. Whether we can apply, so a lot of times we think of consent as being informed consent, and whether our dogs can really grasp that is probably unlikely. So we have to kind of think about it in a different type of way because dogs can still consent. So there's sort of these two different ideas about consent when it comes to our dogs. The first is learned consent. So things like cooperative care, which is just training a dog to be an active, willing participant in their own care. So we see this in other settings as well, like zoos, for example. And teaching them things like start and stop buttons. So things that will indicate, okay, I'm ready to go ahead with this procedure. Okay, this is too much. I want to take a break. So I would like to stop. So those are types of things we can do to help our dogs make those choices for themselves. And then there's, of course, unmediated consent, meaning they use their body language to just say, yes, I'm enjoying this interaction, or no, I'm not enjoying this interaction and I choose to not interact. And dogs use a lot of subtle body language that I won't necessarily get into today, but it's something that we need to learn to understand better. And also to be able to provide things like safe zones for them where they can go and be alone and not bothered by humans and feel like that's their a choice for them to walk away from a situation that makes them uncomfortable, and providing more choices when it's safe to do so. So I think a lot of the welfare, and mostly the welfare protocols out there, kind of look at not inflicting direct physical pain to our dogs. So we think of suffering as inflicting this, direct physical pain, but suffering can come from a lot of different places too. Suffering can be emotional. It can come from things like being fearful. It can come from force and intimidation and diminished autonomy and isolation, because dogs are very social. And, you know, our lifestyles are becoming busier and busier, and our dogs are spending more and more time alone overall. So I think going forward, a welfarist and rights views should also include humane training practices. So using positive reinforcement training techniques, and avoiding punishment when it's possible to do so, increasing available choices, and defining and teaching consent, not just to our dogs, not just through teaching them cooperative care, but also to caregivers to help them learn when their dogs are saying that they're uncomfortable or not willing to interact in a situation. So oftentimes our perspective and our dog's experience don't often coincide. People really tend to anthropomorphize the expression of their dog's emotions and the behaviors that follow, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, because in a way, anthropomorphism can be somewhat good because we want to encourage people to empathize with their dogs and know that they have a very rich emotional life. But over anthropomorphizing or using it in potentially dangerous ways means we may revert to things like punishment, because we assume that our dogs have a moral compass and they're simply, you know, acting out of spite, or something along those lines, or they're feeling guilty because they know they've done something wrong. So it can be detrimental to them. We know that they do feel some that they do feel primary emotions for sure. So things like happiness and fear, for example, but the awareness needed for secondary emotions require a theory of mind and self-awareness. And there is some evidence to show that they do, and I have no doubt that they probably do, but we can't say for certain. So, and we can't say that they feel these things in the same way that we do necessarily, or to the same degree. There are studies that have found that a lot of dog guardians believe that their dogs do feel things like guilt and jealousy. Sanders found that dog guardians recounted their pets as having a conscience when violating the house rules. So like I said, this can be very problematic. And a few studies out there have looked at guilt in particular, which is an interesting one, because guilt assumes that our dogs have this, like I said, this moral compass, and I know what I've done is wrong, and therefore often what happens is we react in a way that might be punishing to our dogs, or scary. But what we've also found is that people interpret guilt, or what we think is guilt, is in fact stress signals or fear in response to their owner's reactions, either in those particular situations that are happening in the moment or something that's happened in the past. So I think that we need to understand how our expectations of dogs can be impactful, in both positive and potentially negative ways as well, and how that can either strengthen our relationship or hinder our relationship with our dogs. There's a lot of influences out there of our expectations on how they should behave, based on different misconceptions. Dominance theory is a big one that probably most of you have heard of. It was based on, well, several things, a lot of ethological research that exists out there looking at wolves. It's been disproven, and it doesn't apply across species in a human household. So it can be very harmful to our dogs to think like that. There's lots of cultural and social implications, as well as our personal experiences will impact our relationship with dogs. The concept of responsible pet ownership really creates this social pressure to conform, to have a dog that is compliant and listens and behaves in a particular manner, especially in public spaces. And people often will make excuses for their dogs when they misbehave or behave out of the realm of our expectations. And then that leads people often to use things like demonstrative discipline. So using the symbolic discipline to show that they, or acknowledge that they know that their dog has done something wrong, and they're showing or demonstrating that they have a control over their dogs in those situations. So for my research, I started with some interviews. So I did 15 interviews of people with their dogs in their homes. And I was investigating the social constructs of dogs and how people implement the idea of consent, or if they even know what that really means and to what degree. I also did a survey, and these questions were influenced by the responses I got from my surveys. I had 4 parts to this. So the first was looking at the types of training methods and philosophies people used. And these were questions that were adapted from a study that looked at confrontational versus non-confrontational training methods. I also looked at the beliefs about dominance theory and ideas about consent in companion dogs. And I looked at social norms of dogs and the ethics of consent and caring for companion dogs as applied to what we expect a good dog to look like and a bad dog, or look like as in behavior, not physically. And the last part, I used 3 scales from the CBARC, which looked at anxiety, aggression, and trainability. And the last part, I used journals. And so these were 6 weeks. People filled them out weekly, and the questions were the same every week. And they were asked to write in the perspective of their dog and in their dog's voice. So this was quite a unique task, and people had a lot of fun with it. And of course, they were quite anthropomorphized, and that was to be expected. But I really liked it because they were asked to reflect on their experience after the fact and whether it helped them with perspective taking. And a lot of people had some really positive feedback for me on that. And it made me think how maybe this could be applied to my own clients in my business, with helping them to empathize with their dogs in certain situations and help them to take their perspective when it comes to how their dog might be feeling in certain situations. So what I found were people would frame what a good dog might look like and what a bad dog might look like. And so, and I personally am not a fan of labels, but for this, it was really important to understand how people view this. So a bad dog was sort of labeled as a dog that knows better, but doesn't listen. They bark a lot. They are dominant. They're aggressive. They misbehave. So things like jumping up and just generally being not focused. And people would often use forms of punishment like timeout and those types of things. I will talk about some of the other things that they used later as well. And a good dog was framed as being always friendly to everybody, all dogs, all people, in all situations. They were considered to be loyal. They should be loyal, always listen. They're submissive, not aggressive, of course, the opposite of being bad. And they come when called all the time, not just when they want to, and they want to please us. Those are the ideas of what kind of this perfect good dog looks like. So there was this idea that responsibility meant we had control over our dogs all the time. And of course, control in certain situations is going to be important to keep them safe. We don't want our dogs just running out into traffic or eating a bar of chocolate. But I think this is sort of a prevailing idea that we need to, really have control of our dogs, and that leaks out into how we treat them on a regular basis. And these restrictions are getting more and more as infrastructure grows in our neighborhoods, and we have smaller spaces and more need, shorter leashes and those types of things to keep control over our dogs. So one of my participants said, I can't stand when someone doesn't have control of their dog. Control also meant that people would use occasional punishments. So things like if she's barking too much, I just give her a quick tap under the chin. And interestingly enough, this person also told me that they only use positive reinforcement when they're training their dog. So they're not thinking of these things as necessarily as punishment in the way that we might, in the way that it actually is punishment. Reverting to punishment in the face of conflict as well. So, maybe knowing better, but still when things go sideways, they revert back to things that they might have known or learned early on, or just, instinct. So one of my participants said, I know better, but I find that sometimes in the heat of the moment, I revert back to traditional things I learned years ago. The importance of obedience. I need her to listen 100% of the time so I can trust her. People feel like they have no other options, which is unfortunate. So someone said, we ended up putting shock collars on them. We tried everything. We had no other option. And the idea of dominance, I know she was just trying to be dominant and I need to control that. But bad dogs are aggressive, and it's because a dog isn't well trained. So it's putting this responsibility back on the caregiver that they just haven't, been responsible enough to train them, which is a really damaging thing to think. And it's also a cause of embarrassment for people, and they feel guilty or they feel like they've failed. And this, ultimately is what happens when a relationship fails between a dog and a person, and it's the dog that pays the ultimate price, unfortunately. So there's misconceptions about dominance that were prevailing as well. So these are some of the quotes that I pulled that were key. So he does try to exert some dominance, and he will still be getting used to the pack order. I know with his breed, I have to be alpha at all times and not let him be dominant. I guess it's like, where's the line between dominance and aggression? Dominant dogs, my sister has a little Bichon Frise, that thing is aggressive as hell, like snarly aggressive and just not friendly. So this idea that dominance and aggression are linked, which is again a misconception. And she puts her needs over what you say, and she knows her place in the pecking order of our family. My husband is alpha, and she knows that. So there's this idea that people, even if they're not, even if they say, yeah, I don't follow this dominance theory at all, I don't believe in it, there's still this underlying sort of ingrained idea about it. People are still saying things like, she knows her place in the family, we're first and she's down here, or things like, and this is from my survey, things like, oh yeah, but it's important that I always eat before my dogs so that she knows that I'm the boss. And, certain breeds need a heavy hand or they'll become dominant. Those types of things are still really prevalent. I also was concerned about the idea of consent, or how can we frame consent in a way that's applicable to our companion dogs so that we can help our dogs adjust to life with us a little bit better, and we can respect their wishes. So I found that most people assume that consent can't be applied to dogs because we're unable to inform them. So this idea of informed consent, again, is sort of prevailing, but that doesn't have to be the case. People also felt that it could be situational. So yeah, well, it's okay if she doesn't want to be pet at the moment, I won't pet her. But if it comes right down to it, and it's convenient for me, ultimately, I'll just, she has no choice in the matter. And there was also this idea of the greater good. So doing it for her best interest or his best interest, and this idea of being able to control in those situations, so to keep them safe, which of course is important, but that also leaked over into what was more convenient to the caregiver sometimes as well. So it did come down to convenience quite a bit. And I think it's important that, you know, if we are to offer our dogs a choice, that we respect that choice. So if there's a situation where we can't necessarily respect their choice, then we need to not offer them one, because we're just going to start to lose their trust. So if we can't ask them something and then them say, no, I don't want to do that, and then us force them into that situation. So I think that's something that we need to consider when we're considering a model of consent for dogs. So Donaldson and Kimlicka came up with this idea, or suggested this idea of a trust-based dependent agency. So agency that's enacted through the trust of someone else. And I think this could be very applicable to our dogs. You know, assessing what is best for our dogs in individual situations, and avoiding decisions based on our convenience, but on what is best for our dogs, but also what their wishes are. So I think it's a balance and a constant analysis to consider what is best for them, in keeping them safe and well, and also respecting their wishes, especially when it comes to things like interactions. I'm never going to force my dog to interact with me if she doesn't want to, because it's not for her greater good. It would be for mine, and that's unfair. So dogs also often have this sort of impossible human standard to live up to. There's these house rules that they, you know, they have to learn and they have to follow. There's these social expectations that dictate what that might look like. And, you know, we don't often teach them well enough that there's no conflict there, that they always know exactly what's happening. So I think it's important that we understand how to best educate them to live in a society that is a very human-centered one. And there's this embarrassment of misbehaviors, and that can lead to this idea that we need to fix our dogs or control their undesirable behaviors. And undesirable behaviors are often just inconvenient to us, or things that we find undesirable, but are quite natural or normal for our dogs. So we need to be thinking about that and being more compassionate about what's normal for our dogs and if it's okay. And this is not just at an individual level, but in society as a whole. And most people are pretty unclear about what their dog's true motivation is. So they assume things like, I heard quite a bit like, yeah, I just tell my dog off when she's doing something wrong, but clearly that's not working, for one thing, because they continue to have to do that. But it's also assuming that their dog knows right from wrong in that situation, and quite often they don't. And most people are unclear also about learning theory, and that leads to the use of aversives and punishment. You know, so like I said, a lot of my participants said, yep, I only use positive reinforcement to train my dog. But of course they're thinking, when I train my dog to sit, of course I feed her biscuits. That's how I trained her. But in those situations where, in sort of these real life situations where maybe something doesn't go right, then what are people doing? They're often reverting to things like aversives and punishment to help to control their dog's behavior.
Hey, Erin.
So, yeah.
Erin, I'm going to jump in. It's been about 25 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, so we're way over. So we really do need to move on, so that Yoonjung has time to do hers.
Yeah, no problem. I was all done. This was my last page, so that was just my contribution.
We will have still some time for questions at the end, and there's a bunch that have been in the chat box. Cool. So we'll let yeah, sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry.
So, Yoonjung, you can go ahead and share your screen.
I have one question. You guys can only see my slide, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, good afternoon. My name is Yoonjung Kim, and I am a master's student from the Department of Anthropology at Seoul National University in South Korea. It's a great honor to be here and to have an opportunity to present my research in this session. In 2017, one phrase captivated South Koreans. I'm the only one who doesn't have a cat. It started on Twitter, but soon became a social idiom used by youth. It was shocking to me because before, cats were not preferred companion animals in Korea. However, as you can see in the chart, things have been changed dynamically. Until the 1990s, the percentage of Koreans who considered dogs and cats as family members was very low. The name Koreans used was pet, 애완동물, which implies that animals are just instruments for human satisfaction. But from 2006, Koreans started to use companion animals, 반려동물, instead. The way people treat stray cats has completely changed as well. It has been less than 10 years since people started to call stray cats as street cats instead of burglar cats, 도둑고양이. Nowadays, almost every university in Korea has a club for taking care of stray cats on campus. In 2015, the first stray cat care club appeared at the university. Their main objective was to execute TNR, trap, neutral, and return on cats. However, a year later, the purpose of such clubs changed to finding ways to coexist with cats by providing a comfortable place for them to live in. This change has also been happening in online spaces. Recently, with the advent of numerous animal channels, new human-animal relationships are being created. In the past, people had no choice but to watch animals that appeared once on TV or meet their acquaintances' companion animals. Recently, however, various animal channels have emerged on YouTube. Because the key to success is uploading videos steadily, it is possible for viewers to create lasting relationships with their favorite animals online. My research investigates this phenomenon. Specifically, I raised the following questions. Why are people who do not raise animals themselves so enthusiastic about animal channels? What are their practices and what do they say about changing human-animal relationships in South Korean society? To answer these questions, I conducted an online participant observation for 6 months and interviewed 16 virtual animal lovers face-to-face. My informants were young people in their early 20s and 30s who consume animal channels on YouTube and develop a relationship with certain animals. As I argue, these people do not simply watch animal videos for vicarious satisfaction, but form virtual but intimate relationships with animals. My analysis draws on studies of virtual relationships by Tom Boylstorff, Ordinary Ethics by Veena Das, Affect by Lauren Bolland. In this presentation, I will first explain the emergence of the phenomenon of LAN cable butlers, 랜선 집사, and the relationship they have with animals. Next, I will explain the 갑수 목장 incident, which caused the change in the practice of LAN cable butlers, and how it is an effective incident that left trauma to the viewers. Lastly, I will suggest the 갑수 목장 incident changed the specific practice of LAN cable butlers and the implication this change has on the human-animal relationships in Korean society. In Korea, people who are developing a new type of human-animal relationships by devoting their affection to other people's companion animals online are now called LAN cable butlers. LAN, which is now being used as a prefix in Korea, is a non-standard word for LAN cable. Butler is an idiom Koreans are using to call cat owners, since people jokes about how cat owners do not raise cats, but serve them. By combining these two words, people who wish for the well-being of certain animals online are regarded as LAN cable butlers. Although there is no agreed definition of what the nature of LAN cable butler is, I found that they are not just regular viewers of animal videos. They know all the stories and genealogies of certain animals, purchase goods, and make made by the uploading YouTuber and actively promote their accounts. As you can see, my informants are well aware of all the histories of a certain animal on channel. Also, they constantly leave comments on how the owner should treat their companion animal based on their knowledge. A very famous cat YouTube Cream Heroes uploaded a video of making sushi for cats. Recently, there has been growing concerns of giving raw fish to cats due to the veterinarian's video. So land cable butlers of this channel commented a lot of worries on the video to let know the owner it is dangerous for her to feed raw fish to her cats. Like, according to the veterinarian's YouTube, raw fish is very dangerous for cats. You'd better not feed them. Because of these practices, YouTubers frequently upload explanation videos to avoid suspicions and bad comments from land cable butlers. A YouTuber had to apologize for the fact that she purchased the retriever from a breeder instead of adopting an abandoned animal. And a YouTuber had to explain that she adopted a Scottish fold cat and that she is now trying her best to take care of the cat's hereditary disease. What happens in the virtual world is real and has a real influence on my informants. In his book, Coming of Age in Second Life, Boylstorff shows how players create a vivid relationship on the virtual world, which is real for them. The reason why land cable butlers can actively participate in the growth of other animals is that they have a collective virtual relationship with not only animals, but also their owners. In reality, the involvement practices that can be criticized as being noisy can be justified because of their steady interest in animals and because they have already contributed to the popularity of the video. However, in 2020, a traumatic incident happened on YouTube. A Kapsu Mokjang incident was a key event in which viewers realized that the virtual relationship they are having with the animal is a very fragile one. YouTuber named Kapsu Mokjang was uploading videos of adopted abandoned cats. He was a veterinary medicine student with more than 500,000 followers. However, it turned out that he actually purchased the cats from the pet shops and also starved his cats to make them act cute. In addition, although it was not revealed in his videos, he made his cats meet hamsters to create provocative videos, which resulted in killing those hamsters. These horrible facts were revealed by his acquaintances. Of course, there have always been animal abuse cases in Korea. However, this was a new form of abuse committed by someone disguised as an animal lover. Land cable butlers responded with anger, and their fear of animal abuse intensified. The incident was not just a matter of corrupt personal ethics of one YouTuber. Land cable butlers realized that the animals that appear from the videos are at risk of abuse all the time. Also, they found that they have true affections for these animals, although this is a virtual relationship. The problem was that because these animals are owned by Kapsu Mokjang, they couldn't know the current status of his animals after he deactivated the channel and just disappeared. The Kapsu Mokjang incident has become a traumatic event, causing land cable butlers to scrutinize other animal channels for their treatment of animals. The Kapsu Mokjang incident was not an exceptional event, but an effective incident that saturated the daily life and present events. In the words of Lauren Boland, this event made people realize the crisis of ordinariness, where they found the crisis on the channel they enjoy every day. Daily life is an affective field where the contradiction of social structure is revealed and experienced. The Kapsu Mokjang incident shows the continuation of the everyday virtual relationship between land cable butlers and animals is dependent on the owner's ethics. This created an obsession with animal ethics and justified viewers' policing of channel owners. First of all, there has been a growing criticism of bringing purebred animals from pet shops or buying them from home breeders. As a result, people are having great antipathy towards the displaying of animals with certain breeds on Twitter, and Twitterians regularly expressing their anger over the social reality in which hybrids are discriminated against. As you can see, one Twitterian uploaded a photo of cats chasing a bug and wrote, "This bug will regret being in this room." Although it was a very cute photo, people raised suspicion this was taken in a home category where people breed purebred cats. Also, all my informants took purebred animal channels very seriously. As you can see, people are holding a competition for mixed bred companion animals to encourage mixed breed adoption in the name of Mixed Korea Beauty Pageant. The reason why land cable butlers are requesting photos and videos from the owners can come from the desire to see animals, but people also check the current well-being of animals through videos that are periodically uploaded. If there's a slight suspicion in the video, people raise questions through comments and analyze the previous videos to find out the truth. Twitter is also actively used in this situation, as you can see in the photos. Not only voicing out on Twitter, these people also make petitions online, reporting the recent abuse cases. Also, they assert the need for a legal revision of the law on animal abuse and on the adoption and purchase of animals. Land cable butlers filed a petition with the Cheongwade to revise the animal law and to punish the abusive owners. With more than 200,000 petitioners, the government responded that they would make efforts to expedite the revision of the Animal Protection Law in the National Assembly. In fact, the Animal Protection Act was revised on February 5th, 2021. If these means are insufficient, people are sharing the phone numbers of the relevant ministries and request people to call the office for revision of laws and regulations. While doing my fieldwork, I encountered more than 3 cases where people called the relevant institutions for animals. In the case of Kapsumokjang, lawyers of the person who exposed the truth are constantly uploading videos of the lawsuit process, and people are also filed collective lawsuit against the YouTuber through angry people, 화난 사람들. Many land cable butlers are still concerned about the condition of cats and asking the lawyers if they can rescue the cats of Kapsumokjang. The Kapsumokjang incident was a shocking incident that all informants remembered. In this situation, the land cable butlers who I interviewed tried to avoid the situation by finding the animal channel that showed the real coexistence between humans and animals. Recently, one of the most popular animal contents in Korea is Hahaha, which has more than 1.505 million followers. Originally, he posted a video of him fishing, but because stray cats gathered at his fish farm one by one, the content has entirely changed. The channel shows how human and non-human animals create affect and faith by sharing the same place. Especially the fact that this YouTuber does not force animals to produce unexpected scenes, and that this channel does not have the exhibition of breeds gives a reason for the informants to keep watching this channel without worries. The YouTuber gave names to all the cats he's been having a relationship with and continued to show their life stories to the viewers. It was the idea shared by all informants that in a society where YouTube channels leads to profits, there is no choice but to add manipulation to videos to some extent. Nevertheless, the existence of animals in the videos has completely changed the culture of defining companion animals as the owned object of the owner as in the past. As Veena Das writes in Life and Words, the ethical is a dimension of everyday life, and moral selves are cultivated through the cultivation of sensibilities within the everyday. For those who routinely relate to certain animals through smart devices, the animal comes as an individual being, and this means that people take care of this animal's own well-being. Also, land cable butlers monitor the ethics of other subscribers for cats and YouTubers' well-being. Recently, some subscribers tried to dig up Hahaha's personal identity. Some wrote that they are real land cable butlers who will fight for the cats and the YouTuber. They were worried this incident might jeopardize the relationship between the cats and themselves. The Kapsumokjang incident made people realize the virtual relationship with YouTube animals also needs the consideration of the well-being of those animals. They realized that while expressing affection towards animals, policing should be done as well. The effect of trauma that was caused by the Kapsumokjang incident strengthened the policing of other channels, as well as the desire to watch safe animal channels free of abuse. This is an event that has created a justification for being involved in the growth of other people's animals, and at the same time reinforced the idea that companion animals should be considered as individual beings. The popularity of companion animal videos is not just a route to make profits within the capitalistic society, but providing an opportunity for us to think about animals as individual beings. So these are my further research questions. How will the media-based relationship between humans and animals in everyday lives change South Korean society? How should the media deal with the companion animals that are owned but recognized as individual beings? How can this interest of people who do not raise animals affect animal welfare in South Korea? Okay, that's all for now. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them now.
Thank you. That was wonderful and not something I had ever thought about before. So very thought-provoking. All right, we have some questions for the group, I think. So let's switch over to those. Go ahead and continue to add questions to the chat box. I'll just start with the ones sort of from the beginning. The first question was for Eva, who someone was wondering whether you explored in your project why humans felt that they could communicate with some species. Like humans generally assume that dogs can communicate with us, and why not others? Did you look into that side of things at all?
Yes, thanks for that brilliant question. Of course, it's very broad in a sense because it would depend always on the species how you answer that, and also on the humans on the other side, because what I found is that it has a lot to do with familiarity. So the reason why we perceive dogs as animals that we can more readily communicate with is probably most of all that we are very familiar with them. While if we assume a person who has never ever in their life interacted with a dog, they might find it very hard to understand dog signals. So it depends a lot on, enculturation in a sense, like what are you used to? And then in the case of dogs, especially, there's also the dimension of co-domestication, which has happened over thousands of years and is the reason that now dogs have developed great skills in communicating with humans. So it's rather the dogs who make it easy for us to understand them, and it's not us being so good at understanding dogs. I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yes, I think so. And I think that we also see the opposite, though, especially in things like conservation, where people assume because they're able to communicate with their dogs or their cats, that that applies to larger animals. And I see people all the time go waltzing up to elephants and expect that that elephant's going to respond to them the way their dog does, and it doesn't end well. Let's see. The next question, well, was kind of a statement, which I think was very interesting, is that someone was talking about the qualification criteria for professional dog trainers and said, I think it's very interesting that it's humans who get to judge whether the person is a good dog trainer or not, when it should be the dogs who get to judge. That was really interesting. And then someone asked, do you think that the fact that people want a good dog, one that's friendly and cuddly, because that's what they are told to expect in a good dog, do you think that that actually ends up with a lot of unsuccessful human dog matches in rescue? I think this question was for Erin, because what people might really need is a dog that's more independent or reserved, which is what we consider not a good dog. So do you think that we end up with a lot of mismatches in rescue facilities?
I do. I don't work in a rescue. I've never worked in rescue or shelter environment, but so I'm sure the processes are different in each facility. But I would assume that that would play a huge part in a lot of rehoming because, well, it does play a big part in rehoming because we have these assumptions that are, we have these ideas of what it's going to look like having a dog. We're going to walk on the beach and we're going to toss a stick and our dog is going to play and get along with everyone. And then we end up maybe with a dog that's reactive or fearful or, all of these things that are individual to that particular dog. And that can really break down the relationship and cause a lot of feelings of guilt that they've done something wrong or that they've failed the dog in some way. And so, yeah, I do think that it plays a big part in it. And I think our expectations are sometimes very unreasonable. And we don't know, and I think what I see a lot, and this isn't in my research necessarily, but more in my practice, is people comparing one dog to their previous dog. So, you know, they kind of expect that dog to behave in the same way that their old dog did. And they're remembering their old dog as a senior who's probably just really laid back and easygoing and life is great. And then they get this puppy and they're in tears because because it's not what they expected. So yeah,
Isn't it funny too that the you made the comment the participants considered a good dog one who was happy to interact with everyone, whereas to be a good person, there is not that expectation. So it's interesting that we apply a totally different reality to dogs.
Absolutely.
So here's a question for Yoonjung. Chris asked, she was thinking about your idea of coexisting with cats, and her research looks at cat-human relationships in neighborhoods in the UK and the US, and she looks at social discourse surrounding free-roaming cats. So she was wondering, how prominent is anti-cat sentiment in Korea? Are there a lot of people who are very anti-free-roaming cat or anti-cat?
First of all, I read the comment asking for the studies of non-cable butlers, but there isn't any in Korea, which can tell you that this animal and human relationships in Korea hasn't studied much. There are only like 2-3 scholars who are working on anthropological research on stray cats. But because this phenomenon is very recent, there's not much studies on it. And yes, there are many people who hate stray cats. But recently, lots of studies are focusing on why we should do TNR to coexist with them. So we are very in the first phase of how to coexist with these stray cats, although there are so many stray cats. We do have like cat moms and cat daddies, we call it like that, who are feeding stray cats. And there are some studies on it. And most of the time it shows how these cat mom and cat daddies are trying to save them, but the government is trying to regulate the numbers of the cats. And at the same time, some haters try to kill them. So it's like very, because all Koreans are living in city, like especially in Seoul. This is a very this problem with the cats are so important to maintain the city, the population of cats. So yes, but currently there is not much studies on this animal and human relationships.
Great. Also, someone asked if you had any links you could share to finding more information about the land cable butlers, because Sarah said she tried to look on Google and couldn't find a lot. So if you have any links to research or any links about where to find more information, if you want to share them, that would be much appreciated. Oh, and also links for information on cat moms and cat dads.
But unfortunately, everything is in Korean. And yes,
that's a problem.
But land cable butlers, there's no studies on it. I have searched it for like years. Yeah, okay, Google Translator will.
Yep, I'll give it a shot with Google Translate. I try to use Google Translate with Nepali all the time, and it does not function.
But in case of Korean, I suggest Paphago. Paphago. Yes, this
great
is like translate well in Korean.
So then someone asked for Eva, what is your take on those speech buttons? You know, Bunny the dog that's always out there pushing the buttons. How do you feel about that? Is that actually just an effort for humans to try to make dogs meet us where we are as opposed to meeting them where they are? Or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's just super interesting because it reminds me so much of other cases, and especially of the animal language experiments that were done with non-human primates who were taught to use lexicograms, for example. I think that was Kanzi. And that was also back then, I think it was about 20 years ago or something when that started, and it was like a huge in the media that Kanzi can now use lexicons to say things like "I want banana," and then there were also the researchers who were very skeptical about this because they were just saying this is conditioning, like the gorilla or chimpanzee learns to associate a certain form, a certain color, a certain shape with banana, and then obviously will always use that because then she gets a banana. And with the dog, it reminded me a lot of that. So while I think it's fascinating, and always with dogs and people who work with their dogs in a constructive way and who just do something to entertain the dogs, I think that's perfect. Like, as long as there's no pressure in the kind of training, well, let them spend time with the dogs. But whether it's actual communication, whether it adds something to our understanding of the dog, and the other way around, or whether it's more like us wanting to see more than there is in, again, something that is very anthropocentric, because we decide what these buttons mean, and then the dog has to learn and understand what these buttons mean, whereas we, or us, watching the dog and just trying to learn what the dog is trying to say in their language, for me would be like maybe more rewarding.
I think it's interesting what you said about people who discount communication, especially from primates, saying that they just associate that color with a banana, and so it doesn't really. Well, that is communication. You know, that's what's frustrating, is that we discount all of these multitudes of ways that the animals are trying to communicate with us. We just, because they're not exactly at the level that we think that we want to communicate at, we discount all of their efforts, which is frustrating. Yes. There was another comment that I really liked that said humans who are regarded as dog trainers or behaviorists are actually people counselors and people trainers. That's really what they have to do, which is very true. There's more human training involved than anything else. I just, for a last minute, I just wanted to talk to all three of you about this concept of control, because there is a link among all of the conversations with controlling animals, controlling the way they communicate, controlling uh, their situation so they can communicate with us, controlling their physical bodies, you know, keeping them under human control. And then also with the cats, you know, even these cats that people don't know, in reality, we're trying to control their lives by seeing them online. So I didn't know if anybody had any comments or thoughts on that that sense of control over all the different kinds of animals. I've scared everyone off. That's not good.
Who wants to go first?
Oh, Erin, I'm supposed to ask you about your dog. Dog's name. Is your dog a good dog? What is your dog doing?
Well, she's perfect, so yeah, she's good.
Naturally.
Her name is Juno, and she's very unimpressed that we're up at this hour. But yes, she's
Okay.
a good girl. And I'm respecting her sleeping space.
That's nice. That's nice. Well, since nobody's talking, I'm going to say, so my dog, back to your good dog, bad dog, my dog Chupacabra was attacked 2 years ago. Well, we were both attacked 2 years ago. And since that time, my dog does not want to be touched. She does not want to be approached quickly. She does not. It's changed her personality. She completely has PTSD. And I always find it interesting that people get upset that I won't control my dog and let them pet her. I mean, people will follow us because she's a hairless dog. I forgot to say that. She's a Mexican hairless dog, so she's very unique looking. And people will actually follow us and say it, but I just want to touch her. And I'll be like, no, you wouldn't do that to somebody's child, I would hope. Of course, you might. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, we have this weird standard that, you know, we apply to our dogs, that they're just public property and that we can, you know, just go up to any dog and pet them. And people always look at me kind of funny because I typically ignore every dog that I come across until they come up to me and clearly want to communicate or interact with me. But that seems odd to a lot of people, you know, because they want to go up and pat all the dog. But I mean, Juno is the same way. She was a big influence for my research actually also, because she's, you know, she is very selective in who she allows into her bubble and to her world. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily get chased down by people wanting to pet her like you probably do with your adorable dog, but yeah, I still get that, and people, you know, will ask if they can pet her, and just, you know, I've kind of gotten to the point where I just say, I don't give an explanation. I'm just going to say no, and people get very offended by that.
I think that's fair. I mean, nobody would come up and try to hug your child without permission. I would hope not, but